Michael. Love you. And thanks, Rick Ball, for playing. Yep, let's give him a nice round of applause. And Mike Tucker, I am putting this microphone over here because that's the one I had, and I don't want anybody to bother it. Okay? I want to be careful and be sensitive. I was supposed to go to a wedding tonight, and I just texted the groom. I said, man, I am so sorry. Hold on, y'all. I'm just kidding. I didn't do that. You know I didn't. I thought you'd laugh a little bit, but you didn't. There you go. Thank you. All right, good. And I said, man, I am so sorry. I just don't want to get close to anybody. So, all right, you know what that means? Short message. Isn't that fun? Come on with that. All right, so I ended up last week, we talked about Elijah. And I talked about how God led him to the brook Cherith. And there he sustained him. He sustained him with a raven that, I could never think of that word, scavenger. That scavenger bird that eats dead meat on the side of the road, that eats dead meat that's been in the desert for a long time. That's how the ravens sustain themselves. And so the raven brings Elijah food. I was asked a question a couple times last week at the end of the message, and someone had said, well, you know, ravens bringing this, these scavenger birds bringing these, how do you know it was? Well, I say this, how many of you know when God does something, he does it good? I mean, when God does something, it's his best. And so you can just count on the fact that when Elijah was fed at the brook Cherith, that it was filet mignon, it was sirloin tips, it was fresh bread, right hot out of God's oven, a cool glass of water, a drink of water from the brook Cherith. And another reason is if it would have been diseased meat, by that raven, man, Elijah would have been so sick, huh? He would have been sick. You ever had food poisoning? You know what it means to just be so sick because you've had something to eat that just didn't go well with your stomach, like a 5-way at the Skyline. You know what I'm talking about. Well, take it another step. Diseased meat for Elijah. No, it was the best. And let me read verses 4 through 6 in 1 Kings 17, just to refresh your memory. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you. And you know what? Let me just stop right there. I would never do this to anybody, but I'm going to do it this morning. I feel fine, but my voice, as you can tell, it could grate on somebody's nerves. And it doesn't. Well, that's you, Johnny. You ain't going to be here the second service. You know what I mean? Praise the Lord. But Steve Ziner and Connie are over here, and they're missionaries to the world, really. They take the Bible to places and you know, Steve, be ready just in case. All right, will you be ready in the second service? You can give a story, can't you? Sing? Yeah, I want you to sing. That's what I want you to do. Mike, you get ready to teach, okay? All right, good. Isn't it nice to have Steve and Connie with us? Give them a nice round of applause. And so here is the verse 4, drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you. And here's to let us know that God's in control. For I have commanded them to bring you food. So Elijah did as the Lord told him and camped beside the Cherith brook, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. That's God. That's God taking care of Elijah. Now, let's just chronicle the life of Elijah a little bit. So here, he's fed by the ravens. He's taken care of by the water from the brook. Now there's a drought. There's no rain on the earth and there's no water. And when you go into verse 9 of 17, God now commands Elijah to go and visit this woman in Zarephath. She's a widow woman. And the verse says, "Now the Lord said to Elijah, go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you." So get this picture. A great victory in chapter 17. Now he's talking to this widow lady, and he asks this widow lady, hey, listen, God, and notice that God had instructed this lady as well. So God had been talking to this woman. And, so she knew that any given time, the prophet was going to come and talk to her about feeding, but she had no food. So there was another step to take in the process. She said, "Man of God, listen, this is the story. You should read it later on. It's a great story out of chapter 17. Man of God, listen, we don't have any food. My son is really on the edge of being sick. All I have is I have a little bit of dough, not money, but dough, for bread to make a cake and some sticks to start a fire." And then, now listen, she had given up. She said, "My son and I, we're going to die." So she was just giving up. She was ready to throw in the towel. She was ready to just say, life's over for me. And he said, "Listen, this is what Elijah said. You go and you fix me some cake. You fix me a cake. You fix me that cake that you were going to fix for you and your son. And you do what I tell you to do." Well, here's what happens, verse 15 and 16 of 1 Kings chapter 17. "So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her son continued to eat for many days." How many of you know that when God does something, man, he does it good? "And there was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah." Wow, that's a man. God took care of that widow lady because she listened to the man of God. She listened to what God was saying through the man of God. But then the story takes a real twist. Now remember, we're still in 17. Look what happens then, verse 17. "Sometime later, the woman's son becomes sick. He grew worse and worse, and he finally died. Then she said to Elijah, 'Oh, man of God, what have you done to me? Have you come here to point out my sins and kill my son?' But Elijah replied, 'Give me your son.' And he took the child's body from her arms, carried him up the stairs to the room where he was staying, and laid the body on his bed. Then Elijah cried out to the Lord, 'Oh Lord my God, why have you brought tragedy to this widow?'" I've said time and time again, we as Christians, we ask God why. Here's the prophet Elijah. "Why have you brought tragedy to this widow who has opened her home to me, causing her son to die?" He stretched himself out over the child 3 times, cried out to the Lord, "Oh Lord my God, please let this child's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's prayer. Don't you like that part of that verse? The Lord heard Elijah's prayer, and the life of the child returned, and he revived. And then Elijah brings him down. So you have this victory here. This is victory. And then Elijah travels to Mount Carmel. And there at Mount Carmel, he confronts King Ahab and says, "Hey, king, listen, you get your Baal worshipers and you meet me at Mount Carmel." I shared this story last week. If you're a student of Scripture or you've been raised in Sunday school, you've heard this story of how Elijah stands on the mountain. He kills 450 Baal worshipers. Wow. Boy, that is victory. So you see victory after victory after victory after victory in Elijah's life. But then here's chapter 19. And by the way, the drought ended at the end of chapter 18. The drought ends. But now you get to chapter 19. It's a little different. This prophet, this bold man of God, look what happens. When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything. Now that's the wife of Ahab. Everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods, small g, strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you have killed them. Elijah was afraid, and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Now, make note of that. He left his servant there. Then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. Can you believe that? Elijah's suicidal. He wanted to take his life. He wanted God to take him. For I'm no better than my ancestors who have already died. Now you got Ahab. This is King Ahab. He's the king of Israel. He's the seventh king in line after Jeroboam, who was the son of Solomon, who was the third king of Israel, who was the son of David, who was the second king of Israel. But now you have King Ahab, and his heart turned toward false worship. His heart turned toward the worship of false gods. His wife, the queen, Jezebel, she is the daughter of the priest, Ithabel, and she was able to turn her husband's heart and the people's heart into worshiping false gods, into of Sidon and Tyre, and then the god of nature, Baal. And under her reign as queen, Jezebel, many of Yahweh's prophets of God died and were killed because of Jezebel. Now you have Elijah. She was wicked. Now you have Elijah. Elijah is this bold prophet. He's strong, man. He's been following God. He's been listening to God. God has sustained him. And in previous chapters, read about it. Sustains him in 17. Raises that widow sons from the dead. I mean, all this victory. Now he is running for his life. He's depressed. He's discouraged. He wants to leave the battlefield. He wants to leave his job. He's ready to cash it all in. I don't understand all this. I've experienced, can you relate? Man, life is going along so well and things are good, job's good, family's good, and then all of a sudden the bottom seems to drop out. This happens and this happens. I'd like to write a book called What's Next? What's next? I mean, what can we expect next? What's coming at us? What are we doing? And everybody's facing it differently as individuals, as a nation, as the world. Nothing's ever affected the world like it has right now in this day and age. You can go back to Noah and the flood 6,000 years ago. It's absolutely mind-bending. So here you have this man of God, and he's on the run. And he's in fear for his life. And in Judah, he goes to Beersheba. And there, now, if you notice, I said make note of that. Make note of that servant. He left his servant there. Now he's alone. Well, there's only one plausible answer, as commentary would tell us. There's only one simple answer here. He was ready to die. He wanted to take his life. He wanted to die. He just said, God, take my life. And he finds a broom tree. Now, a broom tree is in the desert. I should have a picture of it right there. And under that broom tree, he is shading himself from the hot sun, the desert. And look what happens. I mean, he's been saying, God, take my life, take my life. And here's what God does. In verse 4 through verse 8, then he went alone in the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. Just take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors who have already died. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some water baked on hot stones, bread baked on hot stones. Did I say water? I meant to say bread baked on hot stones and a mason jar of water. Yeah, it's a mason jar. Yeah, his mother had been canning beans, and she gave him this mason jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay. How many of you know when God does something, he does it good? Oh, man, he's been discouraged. He's been depressed. All of the above. And yet, God just says, listen. And so he got up and ate and drank the food. And the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights. Who's that sound like? To Mount Sinai. Now, he had been at Mount Carmel. Now he's going to Mount Sinai. Remember that mountain? There's a lot of great mountains in the Bible. There's Mount Carmel, Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah. That's where Abraham offered up Isaac. Mount Ararat is where the ark came to rest. But then Mount Calvary, that's probably the greatest mountain. But these are great mountains in the Bible. There's great mountains, 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai. And the mountain of God, and there he came to a cave and he spent the night. Now, so he only makes one request. God, take me. It's interesting. Because when you read commentary and you look at footnote or however you're studying the context of this chapter, this desert right here where he was under this broom tree, enjoying the shade of that broom tree and enjoying the water and enjoying the hot bread cooked on a stone, was right next to the promised land. Right next to the boy, what a powerful additive, what a powerful note to make. Satan does his best to keep us from the promised land. He is the father of lies. He is the father of discouragement. He is the father of depression. He is the father of all the above. Man, Satan is so cruel. Look what he does today. Look what he's doing today. He's dividing us. Did you know Jesus said it would be like this in the last days? That he would divide nations, that he would divide families, that he would divide brothers and sisters. Listen, look, your redemption draweth nigh. Friends, Jesus Christ is on his way back. We don't know what day that is, but he said in Matthew 24, look for the signs. They're coming. They're coming, and all of us could say, and but man, it is Satan. Man, it's the devil. He's doing everything in his power, and I'm going to give you a verse here at the end of this message to let you know why. I'll let you know why, because with everything that's going on in this, but you got to go back to the story. You got to, Proverbs says, don't boast of tomorrow. We don't know what the day is going to bring forth. Jesus said, live for today. I've come to give you life more abundant and free. Talk to people about me. Share the kingdom of God with people. Let people know that there is a day coming when I will return. Just share the love of Christ with people. That's the only thing. You know what Billy Graham said? Billy Graham, I was reading in his book last week. He said there's two things that you'll always deal with. You'll always deal with race, and you'll always deal with war. And until the heart of man is changed by the love of Jesus Christ, we'll always deal with different things in this world. That's why it is so important to stay on the battlefield. You know, a soldier, he can't, if his commander has given him a command, he can't make a move without it. Can't make a move. He can't leave his post. A soldier can't leave his post. He can't leave his ranks without the command coming from the commander. He cannot lay his uniform down. She cannot lay her weapon down. Can't lay it down. And you know, God commanded those. He commands us. And here's what Elijah was saying. Elijah was saying, man, these people are faithless. God, I'm the only one out here trying to do something. I am the only one out here. These people don't even deserve salvation. I mean, Elijah got that. He got that just so disoriented. He was so, you know, like some of us have been the last few months. I don't care. You know, so angst. Have you been like that? Whew. Man, we're right on the edge. Some of us are like a string on a guitar. You know, if it's wound too tight, it's ready to pop. I love this passage in 2 Corinthians. Paul, this passage where, you know, Paul is, you know, had the Damascus Road experience, and now he's working for Jesus, and now he's telling people about the kingdom. And he goes through a series of persecution and events. And listen to what he says in 2 Corinthians 11, beginning in verse 23. He said, I know I sound like a madman, but I have served him far more. I work harder, but I've been put in prison more often. I've been whipped times and without number and faced death again and again. 5 different times, Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. There are times that I was beaten with rods. I was stoned 3 times. I was shipwrecked. Once the whole night, a day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I've faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced dangers from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced dangers in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas, and I have faced dangers from men who claim to be believers but are not. I worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty, and I've often gone without food. I've shivered in the cold and without enough clothing to keep me warm. Then beside all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches, who is weak without my feeling that weakness, who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger. If I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. Man, Paul, can you imagine? He gets beaten, 39 stripes. Oh, man, I got to go to Thessalonica. I got to go to Philippi. I got to go check on these churches that I've planted. He had the burden of all those churches. You know, some of us face adversity different than others do. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know if I could withstand all that punishment like a man like Paul. I guess you never know until you're in, you know, those circumstances, until you're faced with that adversity and that persecution. But Paul, he ended up giving his life to Jesus for the cause of Christ. And you read all that and you think, man, that's so incredible. And then the question is this: does Jesus really understand, you know, when we go through what we go through? Well, you can just take this story and you try to compare it. Like the words of Elijah really lost courage. He lost courage and he said, you know, I'm the only one out here doing this. I'm done. And then you compare that to Jesus, who was on the cross for 6 hours. And he gave his life, you know, he suspended between heaven and the earth, between heaven and hell. He is suspended. And he has been beaten and lacerated, and the contusions and all the bruising of his body. And he takes the entire sin of the world, past, present, and future, and it's laid on. Does Christ understand? He understands. He understands. You know, it was Elijah who said, you know, I must die. I want to die before the victory that he would experience. And when you think of the life of Jesus and comparing it, you know, to Elijah, Jesus had to die for the victory to be won, for the battle to be won. Elijah said, you know, I've had enough. And Jesus said, it is finished. How many of you know that the world is a battleground? You know, we could say that, we could have said that 6, 7, 8 months ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The world is a battle. Yeah, you know, where there's sin, there's battle, you know. But boy, Satan, and I mentioned this, and I want to go to Revelation chapter 12 and I want to read this verse to you. Verse 12 says this, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in heavens rejoice. But terror will come on the earth and the sea, and the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing, here it is, knowing that he has little time. That's it. He's doing everything possible. He's working so hard. You know, he knows he was defeated in the garden. He was defeated at the cross. It was obvious that he was defeated when Jesus resurrected and came out of the tomb. He was defeated at the ascension. He was defeated at the upper room experience when the Holy Spirit came, just as Jesus Christ promised. And he's going to be defeated when God cracks the sky and his son comes back to get us. He will be defeated. He will be defeated. And he knows it. He knows it, but he doesn't know when it's happening. So the season, you know, he's throwing everything. He's throwing everything at the world, you know, in his arsenal. I love this verse in Revelation 20, verses 1 and 2. Here's what's going to happen to the big D one of these days. Verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven with a key to the bottomless pit and a heavy chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, that old serpent, who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for 1,000 years. And at the end of that 1,000 years, there's going to be a jerk on that chain. And he's going to be loose for a little season. And then God's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. Wow, what's it going to look like? This one's pretty nice. This is a beautiful place to live. He's still preparing heaven, and in his mind, you know, wow, the imagination that God has and that we're created in his image. What must that new world in heaven? I'm looking forward to coming back here for 1,000 years, hanging out with y'all, some of you, you know, so. Man, the devil, man, I just sometimes, and I know, you know, you have to stand behind the blood of Jesus Christ. You can't take it for granted. He is powerful. But you know, I've said it before and I love it. You take his name, the devil. You take the D and drop it, it's evil. He's evil. Devil. You take the D and the E away and he's vile. You take the D and the E and the V away and he makes me ill. You take the D and the E and the V and the I away, he's going straight to hell. One day he's going. It's going to be on that chain. And you and I are going to live without sin for 1,000 years on this earth. Isn't that going to be wonderful? Wow. Man. But you know, I love seeing good stories. I heard a story. I was watching America's Got Talent this week. And Johnny said, Matt, you need to see that man on there who had been incarcerated for 37 years. And then it was just an incredible story. And my wife and I looked over, you know, you've watched a movie, you've watched something and you don't want to cry, you know, and you're just, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to, and that proverbial lump, you know, is right there. And I'm not going to cry. And I looked over and, and then I just, we both were crying. It was great. And I thought, you know what, but then, boy, I came across this story of this young man. What a story. And it's good, in these days of craziness, and, you can't sweep it under the rug. Man, we're in battle. But it's always good, to hear, to see a feel-good, I say a feel-good story. A story of encouragement that just lifts all of our spirits. And I watched it about 3 times, and I thought, man, this is a great story. And I sent it to Mike, and Mike put it in the media this morning. And I want you to see this about this young man. He and his mom lost their home in 2005 in Katrina, there in Louisiana. So they moved to Alabama, and he wanted to work. He's just a young man. Boy, what a story. I want to share it with you, and then we're going to end today's service.
Man walks 20 miles to work until one day cop follows him and sees why.
But before we start, please make sure to subscribe to Did You Know and hit the bell so you never miss an upload from us. Also, leave a like right now.
The cop car pulled up alongside him, but he continued to plod forward. But the cop car continued to follow. He had to make it. 10 miles to go, and he'd be safe. He looked at his watch and walked faster, his legs burning as he powered on. But there was no deterring this policeman. Walter Carr had moved to Homewood, Alabama with his mother after tragedy struck. They had hoped to rebuild their lives after their home was destroyed by the monster hurricane Katrina and wanted a fresh start. Walter was a 20-year-old student, but he was determined to work to support his mother. Little did he know just how hard that would prove to be. Walter had heard that there was a position available at Bellhops, a moving company about 20 miles away from where he lived. It was far to travel, but he had his trusty old car, so he drove over and filled in the application and was lucky to get an interview right then and there. He shook the hiring manager's hand and agreed to start the very next day. If only it were so easy. Just a few feet away from his driveway, his old car spluttered to a halt. Walter's heart started to race as he opened the hood and peered inside. Of all days, his car chose this one to finally give in and die. To his dismay, smoke poured from the engine and he knew that there would be no starting it again. Walter pulled out his phone to tell the manager of Bellhops that he wouldn't be starting after all. Then, he changed his mind. Walter was young and fit, but still, 20 miles is an impossible distance. But Walter was determined. Maybe he could do it. He keyed in the address into Google Maps. Then he started to cry in defeat. It would take him 7 hours to get there on foot, and he had no money to get his car repaired. What could Walter do? He needed this job. His mother was unable to make house payments, and they could find themselves homeless again within a month. Walter simply couldn't let that happen. He had to try. So he set his alarm for 12 a.m. and tried to get a good night's sleep. When 12 a.m. rolled around, Walter awoke. He pulled on his most comfortable sneakers, threw on his jacket, and set off into the night. It would take 7 hours to get there, but he was determined to reach the Bellhops client on time. As if walking the back-breaking 20 miles wasn't enough, life decided to throw Walter another curveball. Walter had started his walk at a brisk pace, but by the time he reached the halfway mark, his legs were shaking. Sweat poured from his face and his feet burned. He had walked over 10 miles, and the exertion was taking its toll. The thought of losing his job on the first day kept him going, as he focused on moving one foot after the other again and again. Then he saw the flash of blue. He had been too focused on keeping his legs moving to notice, but a car had been following him for at least the last 10 minutes. It was 4:20 a.m. and he still had miles and miles to go. Then the car flashed its light and blared its short warning siren, and he knew they were there for him. Walter turned his head to see the cop car rolling up beside him. "Where are you rushing off to, buddy?" the cop asked, pointedly. He had had a rough and late night on parole duty. and the last thing he wanted was more trouble. Walter, gasping for breath, tried to answer him without breaking his stride. He was all too aware that the clock was ticking. The cop had seen enough and ordered Walter into the car. He didn't care to find out what this young man was doing in the street at this late hour. As far as he was concerned, he was up to no good. But when Walter mustered enough breath to tell him the reason for his late-night walkabout, his eyes widened in disbelief. Officer Sean Gray had seen many things in his life, but this boy's determination astounded him beyond belief. They drove the next 6 miles in silence until Walter saw the house appear in the distance. Relief crashed over him like a wave. He had made it before time had run out. He thanked Officer Gray and shakily got out of the car. But there were still more surprises for Walter on that fateful day. The policeman escorted Walter to the door and told the homeowner, Jenny Hayden Lamely, how he had traveled 14 miles on foot to help her with her move. She was flabbergasted by his dedication. When the rest of the bellhop's crew arrived, Walter tirelessly got to work loading boxes onto the moving van. He was exhausted, but he kept going. Then, Jenny wrote the post on Facebook that exploded overnight. Jenny's Facebook post read, "Yesterday was a long day, but a good day. Chris and I woke up around 5:45 a.m. to get everything staged and ready for our movers. Around 6:30 a.m. the doorbell rang. It was a police officer. He proceeded to tell us that he had picked up this nice kid in Pelham early this morning. The nice kid, Walter, said he was supposed to help us with our move today. It was his first day with his moving company, Bellhops, and he was training today. The officer proceeded to tell us that the previous evening, Walter's car broke down and he didn't know how he was going to get to work. So he left Homewood at midnight and started walking to Pelham on 280. He walked all night to get from Homewood to Pelham because he needed to get to work." Jenny was so awed by Walter's determination to get to his job that she started a GoFundMe account to raise the money he needed to repair his car. The target was set at $2,000. But when the Nietzsches read Jenny's heartfelt post, the original amount was exceeded by a whopping $32,000. But soon after, Walter's actions got the attention of Bellhop's CEO, Luke Marklin. Marklin immediately got into his Ford Escape and drove it from Tennessee to Homewood. On his arrival, he presented a gobsmacked Walter with the keys. Walter couldn't believe his eyes. The CEO of Bellhops had just given him his own family car. It was all too overwhelming. And Walter started to cry. He had never experienced such kindness before, as the whole community rallied behind him and cheered him on. Walter's exemplary behavior has inspired thousands of people, and Jenny's original Facebook post has since garnered an astounding 2,000 shares and comments. One commenter wrote, "I'm definitely really touched by his journey as well. It's impressive how we can give excuses to not do something, but then there are people like Walter who don't like excuses and just do it." And another, "Life has made challenges. Walter passed the test. Gracious and humble man." I can't imagine how many times on that lonely walk down 280 in the middle of the night did he want to turn back. How many times did he wonder if this was the best idea? How many times did he want to find a place to sit or lie down and wait till morning when he could maybe get someone to come pick him up and bring him back home? But he walked until he got here, Jenny wrote in awe. Walter's dedication to his job has become a symbol of the hard-working American, and his determination has even inspired a hashtag movement titled "Be Like Walter" on social media. But Walter remains humble and shrugs off the praise, saying, "I just walked." He aspires to become a Marine one day, and he has definitely proved to the world that he can achieve anything he sets his mind to.
Let's stand together. I was in the mansion, we call it the mansion where our offices are. And there's a picture in the hallway. Judgment Day, honestly, I've never really, the caption underneath it just says, "Never give up." And then the small print underneath that, I've never read this picture. It's just been on the wall. It just said, go around, go through, go over, go under, but never give up. Man, that's a great word today. And I'm glad Elijah didn't give up. I'm glad that young man didn't give up. The reward came. Isn't that a great story? And you know, when you just set your mind to it. And I just want to say one more thing. You know, Satan, his biggest deterrent, he'll try to keep us away from the Word of God more than anything else. More than anything else right here. So I encourage you every day, let God talk to you through His Word.